Oh, hi! Today I'm going to show you how to make my high protein vegan bagels. They're actually really easy to make, especially if you have a stand mixer, and they're great for meal prep. Vital wheat gluten is what we're using to add protein to our bagels. You may have used vital wheat gluten before to make seitan, but it actually works really well in bready items. Vital wheat gluten is 80% protein and is about 57 grams of protein per dollar, which is pretty cheap, especially compared to protein powders, which are usually around 10 to 15 grams of protein per dollar. We're using a 1:2 ratio of vital wheat gluten to all-purpose flour. That means for every 1 cup of vital wheat gluten we will use 2 cups of all-purpose flour. You may be able to get away with increasing the ratio to add more vital wheat gluten if you're really worried about your macros, but I really like the texture we get with a 1:2 ratio. As with most things bread, we will be using yeast, specifically instant yeast in this recipe. First off, I highly recommend you use a kitchen scale. Flours and especially vital wheat gluten can be very dense, and so you might end up getting a lot more vital wheat gluten in if you're using measuring cups than you think you are. So I highly recommend using a scale. So the first step is to measure our flour and vital wheat gluten. We're using 180 grams of all-purpose flour, which is about 1.5 cups, and we're using 90 grams of vital wheat gluten, which is around 3/4 of a cup. Next, we're going to add our 1 teaspoon of salt and then whisk everything together really well. Technically, this next step isn't really required since we're using instant yeast, but I've had bad yeast before, so I like to proof the yeast to make sure it's going to work. Add 1 tablespoon of sugar and a packet of instant yeast to a bowl, and then you're going to add 1 cup of very warm water. You want water that's about as hot as your sink can give you, unless you did something crazy to your water heater, which is none of my business. Then we're going to wait about 5 minutes, and your yeast water should look like this. If it's foamy on the top, you know your yeast is working. I'm going to use a stand mixer for this step, and if you have a stand mixer, I highly recommend it because the last 3 times I've done this, I did it by hand, and then today I decided to use a stand mixer, and that was a genius idea because it's way easier. So basically, you throw your wet ingredients in with your dry and just kind of let it go to town. You do need a kneading attachment if you're using like a KitchenAid stand mixer, but basically turn your stand mixer on to the first or second setting and then let it go for 5 to 6 minutes. This step is really important for the texture, so I would recommend using a timer. Your dough should look like this, and it shouldn't really be sticky at this point. If your dough is still really wet, add a small amount of flour until it looks like this dough. If you do not have a stand mixer, this is what kneading looks like. I would highly recommend setting a timer and maybe watching TikToks or something because it feels like an eternity to do this for 6 minutes. If you did this by hand, I'm sure you now need a break. So now we're just going to put our dough in our oil-coated bowl. Cover the bowl with a damp towel. I like to use a wet paper towel, and then I drape a kitchen towel on top of that. This holds in the moisture. If you're enjoying this video and like to see more like it, be sure to like and subscribe. After allowing it to rest for an hour, it should look like this. And now we're going to punch it. Punching the dough releases some of the carbon dioxide that's built up. It also redistributes the yeast, which allows it to do better on a second proof. It also relaxes the gluten so that you can shape it easier, and overall it just improves the texture. We're going to cover this again with our damp towel and let it sit for an additional 10 minutes. And then we're going to divide the dough into 6 even pieces, or as even as you can get it. I use a pizza cutter because I think that's kind of the easiest way to divide it. Then you're going to roll each of the 6 pieces into a ball. This is basically where you're shaping what your bagels are going to look like. I do want to note that I think the dough is a little bit harder to work with just because it has more gluten. So it is harder to make it look like perfectly round and smooth like you see at bagel shops, but it tastes just as good, and I personally don't care what it looks like. So just a warning. Then we're going to put all of our little dough balls onto a plate and cover that plate with a damp towel again. Let it sit for at least 10 minutes. And while you're waiting, you can fill up a large pot with water and bring it to a boil. You can also preheat your oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit or 218 degrees Celsius. After 10 minutes, they should look like this. Now we need to pop the hole in the middle of each dough ball. Just do that with your finger. Try to make the hole about 1 inch to 1.5 inches in diameter, which can be kind of hard. Mine usually end up being smaller than that. I happen to have a donut mold thing that I just let mine rest in to keep the hole open, but you can also just let them rest on a plate. But you're going to cover that again with a damp towel and let it rest for another 10 minutes. This is what your bagel dough should look like after 10 minutes of resting. And once the water has started to boil, you're going to toss in 2 to 3 bagels at a time. I don't do more than 3 at a time because it's hard to keep track of which ones I flip, but you're going to let them boil for 1 minute on each side. I would recommend setting a timer for 1 minute. Once that minute is up, then you're going to flip them over and then let them boil for an additional 1 minute on that side. After they're done, lift them out of the pot. I like to use a wide slotted spoon or anything with holes in the spoon to drain the excess water. Place these on a parchment paper lined baking sheet. Next, we'll be brushing soy milk on the top and the sides of each bagel. I like to use a silicone basting brush because it's easier to get everything covered well. The milk is for browning your bagel, so it has that classic brown look to it. I've found that soy milk is really good for this, but if you have a soy allergy, you could always use a different milk. This step is also important if you plan to use toppings because the milk actually helps the toppings stick to your bagel. I personally like to do 2 plain bagels, 2 with everything bagel seasoning, and then 2 with vegan Parmesan. I really like the Follow Your Heart Parmesan. It seems to brown really well, and it kind of reminds me of the Asiago bagels at Panera that I used to eat before I went vegan. There are other toppings you could do as well. I think cinnamon sugar would be kind of nice. You could also do some mix-ins like raisins or like small dices of apple. It's just kind of up to your taste preference. Cook these for 20 to 25 minutes. The bagels should be kind of a darkish golden brown color when they're done. You should let them cool off for about 5 minutes before you touch them, which I did not, and it was quite painful. If you're not eating all of these in one day, which that's crazy, they will last about 3 to 4 days at room temperature, or you can throw them in the fridge and get maybe a week out of them. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more easy, high-protein recipes, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any ideas, recommendations, or questions, shoot me a message.